What's going on, Dragons? Happy Friday. As always, I'm your co-host, Cory, and welcome to episode 31 of the ErCast, your weekly Friday Night Magic pre-show. Joining me in the Dragon's Den this week, as always, is the plutonic peanut butter to my jelly, my very special co-host, Cole.
Well, thanks a lot. I'd like to think of myself as a smooth peanut butter rather than crunchy. But I'm, very complimentary to being the peanut butter, the protein of that sandwich.
I think I threw you for a loop because we did a quick take of this 2 seconds ago where I was trying to think of like slightly derogatory, slanderous pairings that you could be. And I threw you I threw you for a loop by throwing in a nice one this time.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're like allergic to peanut butter, in which case it's a pretty deadly combo. Yeah.
So Cole, how has this week in Magic been treating you?
Oh, Cory, it's just ramping up. I feel like a couple episodes ago I hadn't been able to play any Magic. Then I was able to play a little bit more, and then this last weekend we had a huge get together and got to play. Probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 games. We played from early in the morning until late in the afternoon, and I walked away with a couple dubs, which is always a good feeling, but it's always just a better feeling to get the chance to spend time with our friends, eat some good food. And Cory, I gotta say, you hosted a great party. That last week we were throwing it around of whether or not you were going to be able to follow the rules and host a great game night. Well, you came through.
I like the fact that I was going to say, I like that I'm getting all the credit, but really I did a small fraction of the work. Sharon definitely put in the vast majority of the effort. I just kind of rode her coattails to look like I was doing a lot of work.
Honestly, I'd like to restart. Cory, thanks for opening the door for me in the beginning. Thank you to Sharon for hosting such an amazing game night.
That really is the correct approach, I think.
No, it was a ton of fun, and we got to play some well-rounded games. I think everybody had a fun time. Everybody smiled and laughed, and that's all you can ask for.
No, I think you took home some W's. I took home at least 2 W's.
Erica
so everybody had like their own chance. Yeah, everybody had like their own chance to kind of shine. Now, before we get into the topic of today's episode, we do have a couple loops to close from the last week's episode.
Okay.
So I guess loop number 1. So we did last week's episode on how to host game nights successfully.
Right.
And we were going to do a temperature check to start off this episode on how successful I was or was not.
That's what we were just talking about.
Yeah, but let's put it in on paper now. On a Fibblefip to Urza scale, what's the power creep here?
I would put you an Azami Lady of Scrolls.
That's the incorrect answer. Actually, the highest tier there is Fibblefip because he's been extremely power crept over the years with each new iteration, whereas Urza has been nerfed over the years. Each new Urza becomes fairer and fairer.
Okay. Well, in that case, I would say that was a serious Fibblethip of a party. Good food. The charcuterie board was awesome. Which wasn't. It was involved. It was an awesome cheese. It was a mango cheese that was to die for.
While we're throwing out things that happened at my house, but I had very little involvement in, the charcuterie board was fantastic.
But otherwise, it was good lighting. That was that's a huge thing for me. Like I don't like squinting down at the cards, and there was a massive increase in lampitude.
Yeah, lampitude. That's the scientific term, I believe.
It is. I can confirm that. And otherwise, we just listen to some good music. That you guys had tons of drinks ready, tons of snacks, and sufficient space. And the dog Lily, she's always just an absolute delight, and she proved to be just as good of a host as you were, Cory.
If not better.
Very friendly, and she didn't play any games though, so maybe next time.
Yeah, maybe next time. I did think when we first got her that it would be entertaining to have her with either a giant plush D20 that could be rolled during our D&D games, or some kind of large like plush magic cards, so that maybe she could like tap lands or something. I haven't worked out all the kinks yet because she does like to shred through most of her plush toys unless they're like those hard Kevlar, toughy ones.
So basically, if you make her a plush magic card, you got to get it graded and put in one of those big, plastic hard shell cases so that
exactly.
She can't damage it.
Yeah, pretty much. The other, I guess, issue we got to put to bed, because this popped up on a couple of them, and I know, listen, I get it, I get the joke, but there was some interesting concern, Cole, about your enragement at me last episode regarding inviting or not inviting new players to events.
I think enragement is I don't even think that is a word, but if it were a word, it would be a little of an overstatement. I was just, I'm a defender for the little guy. I like it, I know how it is to get left out, and so you don't want to.
I think your defense here is slanderous. You're already posing me as the enemy here. I defend the little guy. Therefore, Cory, the ostracizer.
No, and you didn't ostracize anybody, but it's important to. Well, we talked about like if new players, maybe you don't want them there because the vibe is like, oh, you want experienced Magic players tonight, and I think that's a fair point, but also at the same time, my friends that are newer players, I'm always looking to get them more involved, and so usually I think we have such a wide breadth of skill in our group of like, and that's not an insult, but just to more say, I'm sorry, experience is the better word there, and a lot of our friends are very willing to play with new players, and so if you are in an environment that facilitates it, I think that's great, and if you're not, I think that you are great as well.
Yeah, so I believe the journey here, or the point here, is that we can disagree or have conversation on items, and then when we stop recording, Cole and I are still friends. So there was a few, I guess, concerned citizens that reached out.
No, it's literally all banter. I'll tone it down.
I definitely cried that night, just so we're clear.
I agree with your statements, sir.
That's what I need. I don't really need a co-host. I just need like a mindless automaton that regurgitates my opinion back to me.
I plugged myself into an AI chatbot like 10 episodes, dude. I'm playing Fortnite right now.
Who is Cole? But all seriousness, or all joking aside, today's episode is going to be a little bit more conversational, maybe a little less magic related, just to kind of put it all out in the open. So we did recently celebrate our 1-year anniversary as a podcast. Now, oh God, it's coming back. It's coming back. Or did it never leave? And we did talk about making this into like a little side bonus episode, but unfortunately, schedules get caught up and things like that. So we're making it more of a longer form, kind of full episode here. But we wanted to talk a little bit about how the year's gone for us, kind of have a reflective, retrospective chat about things we think we're doing well, things we have learned kind of throughout the year of doing this. Because I kind of have likened this, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong or right, Cole. I kind of am likening this to like restaurants or retail, right? Where people go, oh, you'll never appreciate a retail worker until you've worked in retail.
Sure.
Or you'll never appreciate, food service until you've worked in food service. This is kind of like you don't realize how much work is involved on the back end until you're in the weeds with a timeline.
Right.
Or a deadlines to meet. So we thought we would kind of not necessarily get into the nuts and bolts of how the podcast is made, but just kind of reflect on things we might have learned or grown from as the year's gone on.
Sure.
So we did have episode 1 came out Cinco de Mayo 2023. Coincidentally, had nothing to do with Cinco de Mayo. But just to kind of kick the conversation off with you, so a couple stats for you. So this is episode 31.
Right.
So we rocked out 30 episodes our first year out of, I guess, possible 52 if we're going each week. We are currently up on 3 platforms now, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
Nice.
And we've managed to have 8 guests on across those 30 episodes, or I'm sorry, 8 guest episodes. So we have had a couple people show up multiple times. The first guest, in fact, was this guy named Cole, who is now a co-host.
Wow, he must have done so well on the first one. You couldn't turn him away.
Like a barnacle is on the ship is what it was.
Well, that's what they call me, Barnacle.
Yeah, exactly. There you go, Barnacle. We just couldn't scrape him off, and he stuck around.
Well, yeah, and what an thank you so much for inviting me on in that initial episode. And so, although this isn't necessarily my year anniversary, I'm super excited to just be a part of this and be celebrating the completion of this first year.
Well, obviously, I'm glad to have you on. It's sort of weird, right? Like a weird place to try and figure out where to start this conversation at, because I had a lot of thoughts. I write show notes before we kind of hop into these things, which you can obviously tell by my exorbitant amount of rambling and ums and uhs and other filler words. It's almost like I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I have a rough guide here, right? So where I thought we could kind of start the conversation at is 1 year in. As a temperature check, how do you think, Cole, we're doing towards the original goal of the podcast? Yeah. So, I'm sorry.
No. Go on.
So, if you were there, in the early conversations, for those of you who've listened from like episode 1 or anything like that, obviously you remember Dylan. Right. Nothing like, don't worry, he's alive. Nothing crazy. We're still friends. There's nothing like, there's no hidden drama or skeletons there. He just scheduling didn't work out. But our early conversations were, hey, we want to have a podcast where we talked about things around the community of Magic without necessarily chasing the release schedule. That was a big thing, a big discussion we had early on is, how can we highlight things about the community? How can we highlight things about our love for the game of Magic, whether that's strategy, whether that's cool cards or decks or events, stuff like that, without really having to get into this endless loop of spoiler season, deck upgrades,
right?
Next spoiler season, and because you end in this like endless loop of burnout.
Yeah, because there's just the content release is so constant, and to keep up with it and to keep up to date, because so many people are kind of covering or ready to pounce upon it as soon as it comes out. It's to be able to create the appropriate amount of content. You have to be certainly watching that Twitter feed, ready for the secret lair Hatsune Miku email to land in your inbox.
Yeah, and I think there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because even you and I mean, we're not really in that stream where we're like, oh, boom, 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 like my next 4 episodes are going to be the 4 pre-con upgrades for Modern Horizons 3, followed by spoiler season for Bloomberg. Like, we're just not in that feedback loop,
right?
But there's nothing wrong with creators who are, because we still see those decks come out. We're still excited for the new cards, stuff like that. We just kind of actively made it a focus from the early stages that we weren't going to be in that feedback loop. Now, we could have a long conversation on if that gives us a finite ceiling or has capped us on growth as a podcast.
Sure.
Because we're not, attracting all those viewers who might just be going, oh, I want to upgrade the Eldrazi deck when it comes out in June. What's a, $50 upgrade?
Well, so my thoughts on it are that, obviously we've had a couple of episodes that are focused around set releases, and a lot of what those episodes become, like for us being, a radio show essentially, or just like a podcast without a video component, it becomes a lot of reading, reading card text, which, like, as we've seen, it's just like, oh man, they'll put a paragraph on that. They're in Bloomberg, they're changing ETB to enters so that they can squeeze more text onto the cards, because it's just necessitated at this point with how the mechanics are increasing in complexity. But so I think we've appreciated kind of straying away from the having to list off cards, having to read off the details of the card to fully convey what we're talking about, and kind of for edging our way towards more conversational topics or like magic concepts rather than details.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to also not just the kind of the core values, for a better phrase, like not just the core values of what we wanted the podcast to be, but also the fact that it's not necessarily the most entertaining thing to watch. Like in when you come out with any kind of podcast, you kind of want to scratch one of two itches, right? Which is the intellectual itch or the creative entertainment itch.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's watching a podcast where like, boy, this isn't intellectually stimulating or it's not fun. Like it's boring and dumb. Like it just doesn't exist, right? Like you need some stimulus.
don't set us up to get roasted in the comments.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They're like, well, I listen to you and you're both. Ha ha.
All right. So if you're thinking of commenting that, we've already done it to ourselves. So it would really it'd look ironic. But
we're pre-roasting. It's like a preset on the oven. But if we look at like entertainment standpoints of doing card reviews and stuff, we're at audio only podcast at this point. One day we might become video, but in an audio only setting, it is very difficult to read off a block of text and have that be captivating and engaging. And speaking for myself, a lot of times when I see these spoilers, I want to see the visual, just because it's easier to comprehend when I can see the card in front of me, where I can read the actual text myself, kind of parse out what it's actually trying to do.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. Like a lot of during spoiler season, you might just see the text, or recently with like Modern Horizons 3, obviously all those photos were so blurry, and they ended up releasing them as unblurred photos because they're like, well, if you got to see them, you might as well enjoy them in the proper JPEG format. But seeing it with the art, it kind of just makes it more cohesive for me. I think the game is a million times better with the art. Like you could play it with the cards could just have the text on them. Like the art is just the cherry on top. But I'm a person who really values the artistry of the cards, and I'm excited to see the new creatures in all of their glory, not just the text box.
Like I said, so I think that kind of ties back to the original goal, is that now one of the things also when we're talking about the original kind of early day conversations we had around the podcast, and you can see this reflected in maybe the first like 3 or 4 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely in the first episode, and I think it kind of tapered off more and more as we got into it. Is the original idea was to have a little bit of news, like hey, a weekly news segment followed by a main topic.
Sure.
Give you a little bit of a taste of hey, what's going on with Magic, because the concept was you go to your Friday Night Magic and you've got hey, here's everything that happened in the community in the last week. And then some kind of just conversational topic. Now the news portion has kind of like obviously it's tapered off a little bit. I could see us bringing it back maybe in the future in a different way. Like we might play around with the formatting a little bit. But I think in the past year, I've really learned, and maybe you've learned as well, that that's not necessarily core to what we're doing at the podcast. It was a nice idea, but it's not necessarily like if you were to summarize the ErCast in a 2-sentence summary of what the core mission is, I don't know if that's in there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's still space for like us to make cool announcements, and if there's exciting news in the community, we might have conversation about it, obviously. But it definitely is not the main focus.
Yeah, and I would say too, that portion might have died off, but you still see it crop up every now and then when we're talking about how was your week in Magic. And you bring up things like, I'm really excited for the Hatsune Miku Secret Lair, or I'm really excited because I built this brand new deck. So you still see things like that might be not necessarily news, but relevant to recent events, so to speak, in the Magic community.
Yeah. And then also like, if we do any sort of events, we usually talk about them and describe our experience there, and kind of like, that is in a way news, because often at those events they do little reveals, or they're trying to hype you up for the next spoiler season. So
yeah, I would say though the closest we still do to like news is when we go to events. We typically give like a recap of the event, whether that's a whole episode dedicated towards it or we have like some kind of conversation revolving around it.
right.
And I think that's still probably important to where the podcast goes in the future. Because again, it ties back to being involved with the community, right? And going to these events, not necessarily like, hey, I'm flexing about the 5 people I met at the event, but talking about things you saw around the event, the excitement on people's faces when they were able to go to these drafts or they were able to win, massive wall-sized cards and stuff like that.
Yeah, it gets people excited, and so I think talking about it and letting there's if a newer listener was listening, I would hope that they would maybe be a little bit more confident or interested in going to a Magic event near them. Mm-hmm. Which, so I think at the end of the day, like that's a big goal of the EarCast as well, is like getting people, trying to get people more involved or just opening up the idea of like Magic is such a social game. I think it can, we can find a healthy medium for people who maybe don't feel like they can step out of their shell and they have a hard time going to that sort of thing, but just feeling comfortable at your local game store or trying to find a Magic club makes a big difference.
Yeah, so those kind of like the origins of what, or the core tenets and tent poles, if you were, of what we wanted the podcast to be. Now, obviously, it's a fluid concept, right? Like if you go 10 years in the future and we're still doing this, hopefully, maybe, that might change a little bit. It's going to shift a little bit with our own perceptions on the community and our own kind of needs as creators at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it's a temperature check, over the last year. I would say we're not necessarily, I wanted this to be like an honest episode, right?
Okay.
So I would say we're not necessarily like, hey, I'm not the command zone or anything, right? And maybe we never are the command zone because we're not doing all those pre-con upgrades and stuff like that would naturally bring in new viewers. But I do think we've done a good job at kind of getting more involved in the community than you and I were as individuals not doing the podcast, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm like in reference to the command zone. I mean, that's such a huge, that's apples to oranges. It's a, massive difference, but I'm very happy with the progress that's been made over the year. And I think like we've obviously had, we did the 30, we didn't do the 52. We missed out on a lot of episodes. We also had a lot of like family, stress and like things going on in our lives that just didn't facilitate but recently and in the last, I think 2024, we've been putting so much effort into, trying to pump them out and get them, making good content or at the very least making better content than from the beginning. Like our audio quality's improved, I think our conversational skills have improved, and so I think there's a lot of like tangible improvement every time we make an episode. I think like, okay, that was probably the best episode we've done, like, so I think it's just a matter of putting in the hours and the blood and the sweat and the tears and the buying the cardboard and ripping open the packs and all that sort of thing. And just
I agree with that too, because it's one thing to listen to this today, right? And let's say this was your first episode, which if it is, I don't know.
Episode we should start with. We should 100%. We'll put a warning in at the beginning that says, "Do not listen to this episode first."
Yeah, I don't know why this would be your first episode. Wow, my first episode's them recapping a year of episodes. But I think if you were to go back and listen to the very first episode, right, there is a night and day difference that you might not even notice if you were to sit there and listen to all 30 episodes, you listen to all 30 of them as they were released in real time. You might not look back and go, wow, there's been that much difference between 1 and 31. But I guarantee you listen to 1 and you listen to 31, you would hear a huge difference.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like, when you see a dog or like if you have a dog that's young and it grows up and it's like before your very eyes, like that thing is like you blink and it just is so much bigger, but it doesn't really feel like it until you see pictures of them and you're like, oh my gosh, I can hardly remember how small Montana used to be or something like that. And I think it kind of has worked like that. Like the difference between episode 31 and episode 1 is a lot more drastic. But if you look at them episode to episode, I think it's been a healthy, like we've worked out a lot of, kinks. Obviously with the audio was a huge problem at the beginning. It's not perfect now, but it's, we're making strides to improve it. So the tangible difference is there.
Here's to give you an idea, right? If you weren't around, let's say you hopped in at episode 20 or 15 or something like that. If you weren't around at the beginning, just to give you an idea, the very first episode, Dylan and I sat down and we wanted to kind of introduce ourselves to the audience, right? I think it's a great spot to start any podcast. Hey, here's who I am. Here's what I'm about. Here's what to expect kind of going into your listening experience.
Right.
So the very first episode was commanders to get to know us by, right? Which is you're in Magic. How else are you going to get to know somebody than by their decks?
I think that's fair.
That single episode had to get split into 2 individual parts because combined it runs over 4 hours.
Right.
Now, am I going to say that is the most enjoyable listening experience ever? No, because it was not an enjoyable recording experience. And that's not like a reflection on the conversation or anything like that. That's a reflection on sitting down for 4.5 straight hours. I think we took a single water break, talking into a mic about commander decks and going, oh my God, this episode has gotten out of hand, but we promised at the very top of the episode we would give 5 decks to get to know each of us by, or whatever the number was.
Yeah, that's a timing thing. I think that's been for me a huge improvement from the episodes I've been in as well. I think there was a point where our average episode length was probably in the realm of an hour and 30 to an hour and 45 minutes. And we've worked really hard at, sometimes we're having good conversation and it goes over. Sometimes we're having tangential conversation and it goes over. But regardless, we've been trying to get it down to an hour. And I think it's a lot more consumable in that format. When it's so long, it's like, you have to break it into so many more pieces. And I think it's a better podcast from start to finish than from start to break 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 to finish.
Yeah, and if you were to break all of these kind of improvements into goals, right? Like, hey, I want to get better at thumbnails, or I want to get better at editing, and I want to get better at pacing and stuff like that.
Right.
Getting the timeliness on this and the episodes down to that hour 15 mark that we consistently strive for now.
Yeah.
As I would argue might have been our greatest victory thus far.
Definitely.
You can go, man, the thumbnails look better, or maybe you think they look worse. I don't know. But, if you go from 4.5 hours across 2 parts of a single episode, then for the longest time, getting under 2 hours was like its own burden.
Right.
Then we were completely hitting an hour and a half. Now we're in that hour to hour 15 kind of sweet spot where sometimes it hits like an hour 20, depending on the conversation. But we're much better at kind of tailoring and being cognizant of our time now as we record.
I gotta say, I'm giving myself a pat on the back for that one, because I've been a proponent of that since the very beginning. And so, to the listeners, what can I say except you're welcome? We get copyright strikes.
Hey, yeah, we can get strike for this. So and stuff like that, it doesn't seem like it's a big victory, right? Like you're like, oh wow, they shaved 10 minutes off their podcast or whatever. But those things actually lead to a better product overall. Mm-hmm. Not only is the conversation usually more like purified, it's not as watered down because you're not stretching to try and get to 2 hours or anything like that.
Yeah.
So you kind of like parse out topics you don't need to talk about. Also, this might be a big shock to you. When you have less of a conversation, the editing becomes a lot better, because if I were to dedicate an hour to edit down a 2-hour podcast versus an hour to edit down a 1-hour podcast, well, that hour is going to be used more fruitfully,
right,
to give you a better end product.
So what you're saying is we should really make 1-minute episodes and give you 59 minutes to edit that 1 minute into like the craziest 1-minute podcast you've ever seen. That's the challenge.
Yes,
that's the goal.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And we'll have like a 1 minute episode come out every day.
The episodes get exponentially shorter. They started out at 4, then to 2, then to 1 and a 15, then to 45, 30, 15, 10, 5, 2, 1, 30-second episodes. Podcast shorts.
Now, so I've got a couple questions for you. I think we kind of go from here. So, we talked about the original goal of the podcast and kind of how we've grown throughout the year on that.
Yeah.
If you could, looking back at the year, so you've been on, I think episode 5 or 6 was the one you first guest hosted on, and then you kind of came in as a guest co-host around episode 8 or 9.
8, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that was, if I remember correctly, that was how to balance power versus fun at the table, which it should be noted is still one of our top performing episodes, as in like any given week, it still gets replayed a decent amount because I think it's such an evergreen topic.
And for the record, that was the 9th episode, and that was July 28th, 2023.
There you go. But let me ask you this. So looking back on them all, whether it's episodes you were in or episodes you might have listened to before you hopped in, what do you think was the episode? Like if you had to tell somebody, hey, this is the quintessential 1 or 2 episodes to listen to that you think was our best work, what do you think it would be? Or what just stands out to you as the most memorable conversations?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a little bit of a fan of, in terms of our most memorable conversations, I think is going to be bringing out our guests. Like we've had some excellent guests over the course of the last year, and some very close friends of ours, and some creators that we'd like to become closer friends with. And I think there's just so many other people that we've been trying to reach out to and get the chance to converse with them about this thing that we share a passion for. And so personally, I'm obviously biased towards my fiance, Erica, but I have also, enjoyed all the episodes with everybody. There's definitely no favorites other than my fiance, Erica, but no favorites. It's been so great. But if you want to cut out the guests in terms of this, what our best episode is, just in terms of our conversation. I've just appreciated more of the episodes that we're bantering. Like I liked the combat trick episode. I felt like we had some really good some good bants. And
there's a lot of dispute about fogs in that episode, from what I recall.
And trying to shine a light on like an a smaller topic. Like I also really liked the underused keywords episode, where I felt like we kind of got to get creative and draft up some interesting solutions to outdated keywords.
Yeah, for me, I really cherish the guest episodes, right?
Yeah.
And it's not because you and I get sick of talking to each other or anything like that. But one of the things, and I brought this up on like multiple episodes, I feel like at this point, I feel like I'm like the cheerleader of this. It does, that's not in front of the crowd. Nobody's recognizing me, I guess. But I've always been extremely moved, especially over this last year, extremely moved over the community as a whole, right? The support system that you get within this community.
Right.
And I say that as somebody who has done YouTube before, right? Like when I was getting started in college, when I was like my mid 20s and stuff like that. Yeah, I did a lot of Pokemon content, and actually I've met some cool people through that community. That
right.
I met Dylan doing Pokemon stuff, and we started the podcast together. I met John
from
doing
Chaotic
Pokemon stuff. He's Chaotic Commander now, and we've known each other probably close on 8 or 9 years at this point.
That's really beautiful.
So it's not to say that like you don't meet people in these other communities, but the value and the free kind of like knowledge you get from everybody in the Magic community, it's so like free flowing, really stands out to me. So when one of the first breaks, I think, with this podcast was we were maybe a month into releasing. I think we were like episode 3 or 4. And I was on Twitter and I just see like a random post, right? It's like, hey, if anybody ever wants to get into content creation for Magic the Gathering, you should reach out to me because I'd love to share what knowledge I have, right?
Right.
So I reach out to them. And that was Joe Cherries, who used to be on the Nitpicking Nerds. He now does his own kind of standalone channel and streaming and stuff like that. But in just reaching out and having that opportunity to reach out to somebody, he's given me so much feedback on things like pacing, on things like thumbnail layouts and designs.
Sure.
That just is free information, that is knowledge that you see people like go in these weird rabbit holes of, I could take a master class for $40 or whatever to try and learn. That
saying that from experience, Cory.
No, I refuse to pay that for these things. I'm a learn it on the streets kind of person.
Right.
I'm a learn through failure person at this, very much 100%. But when we look at like the episodes that stood out to me the most, it's always been the guest episodes, because I have never reached out to a guest. Now, that's not to say I never will, right? But I've never once reached out to a guest that's been within our friend circle on these things, where somebody's like, ugh, you're too little of a podcast to be on. You're too unknown. I'm not getting enough exposure. Like,
it's not worth
those
it.
Conversations don't exist. I don't think I've even had one person tell me like, my schedule doesn't work out for it. Like, for the most part, they'll make it happen.
People are generous with their time.
Yeah, they're extremely generous with their time. And when you take out, if we take out John, right, who, like I said, I've known for a while, all the other guests that we've had on the podcast are people we've met in the last year. It's not like, oh, we had Ken or we had Ashley come on from the MTG channel and we've known him for 5 years. No, it's like, when we met Ken, June of last year in passing for 5 seconds. And then we hit it off.
That's how good of an impression it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, we hit it off. We met back up at another Command Fest like 4 or 5 months later.
Sure.
And now once a month we go to each other's house and play Commander, But those are things like they get cultivated over the way this community kind of operates. So for me, the episodes I think have been the most successful over the year has been things like when Ken came on and we did Drafting Our Thunder Junction like Outlaw Crew.
Right.
It's a fun banter episode. You've got a really nice guest who you can't speak highly enough of, because you think you speak highly enough of some of them and they like somehow shatter the ceiling.
Yeah. Everybody we've had on has just been so nice and generous. And so, a huge shout out to each of them. You said 8 episodes, but it's probably been like 6 guests.
Yeah. Now, including the 8, I did include you because you were technically a guest.
Well, I'm flattered.
On that episode.
I'll take it.
And now you're like a bad rash.
I'm definitely the most prolific guest at this point.
He just won't give up. But no, like those. Now, in terms of like the most thought-provoking, I guess, episode or things that succeeded as far as like community involvement, I really think the International Women's Day episode we had with Ashley and Erica was on it as well, was probably the most I don't want to say important. I mean, important topic, I would argue.
Definitely. I would say important. Yeah.
But, it comes with its own like downsides, obviously, which I think we've learned as well of, these are important topics and you kind of have to stand up for your value system. And you're trading those off for like the quick views, right? Because we could have not had that episode and had like top 10 budget commanders, pow, pow, pow. And there's nothing wrong with that content. But I don't think that content would be true to yourself or myself.
We watch out in the future for our planned top 10 budget commanders podcast. But no, I think there's a lot of like cool, things that you could do to kind of enact activism in the community. Like this, recently we had Brian on talking about charity. And using magic in this game we all love to raise money and be able to help people. I think International Women's Day obviously coming up is June, Pride Month. It's these things that are it's important. It's really important that their attention is brought to them as being inclusive and a way to use this shared passion to help people, or at the very least provide support.
I'm going to talk about one other guest. I'm not going to name drop because they weren't technically a guest on an episode. But I do have one other memory that really jumped out to me that was sort of like content creator relatant over the past year.
Okay.
And it did involve the podcast. This isn't like, I met somebody or whatever, right? So, and you can scrub back, if you're listening, you can scrub back the last 30 episodes to try to figure out who this is, but I'll never tell. So we did have a question of the week come in. And the reason I bring this up is because over the last year, you and I think we've met a lot of really great creators. We have a chance to play a lot of cool games with people.
Yeah.
We still haven't really lost our like fanboy sense of some of them, right? You know, it's not lost on us like, oh, these are really amazing people. I'm really lucky to have gotten a chance to interact and get to know them on a personal level.
Right.
So we recently, well, I won't say recently because I don't want to out the person again. But we did have a question of the week that came from another content creator. And you were such a like, this was special to me, was it was such a creator that you were a fan of that we had to pause the recording so you could kind of collect your thoughts and then edit out you fumbling over your answer because you were so taken aback by who it was.
You throwing me under the bus. You throwing me under the bus, Corey. We did all that work. We buried the body. Nobody had to know that I had fumbled on a question of the week. Yeah, but it was exciting to hear from. Just again, it's the inclusiveness of the community that people are willing to engage with us. We're I would say a small content creator with goals to become bigger, and so I'm really glad that people are willing to engage and are looking to engage with us on that level.
Yeah. So I don't know why. I just found that as like a very memorable moment kind of as we go through this, because it's not just so much. And I think this gets lost sometimes if you're listening to podcasts from other people.
Right.
It's not so much just like we sit down, it's a Monday or it's a Tuesday right now, but usually we sit down on a Monday. It's not so much we sit down Monday, flip on the microphones and go, all right, time to clock in for work. Like it's still a journey for us. It's not like we're 9 to 5 podcasting. We've got day jobs. This is sort of a side hobby that we would like to develop out.
Yeah, eventually it'll be 9 to 5 podcasting. You guys will have 8-hour podcasts to look forward to coming the fall quarter of 2024.
Oh God, you put a timeline on it. It's over now. Now that being said, so those are the ones you think were the most successful. Is there an episode you would like to have swept back under the rug, or you think we could have done better on?
Yeah, all the episodes where Cory is a guest, I would say we could just sweep those away. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think there's any point in sweeping away our episodes. It's a learning experience. Obviously, this is our, or at the very least, this is, kind of my first attempt into this world, and it's not. You can't be embarrassed about the past. So there's some episodes that I think the audio is just awful, and like for instance, I don't remember which one it is in specific, but you have to mute, you have to almost mute it when I'm speaking, and you have to turn it up really loud when Cory is speaking. And it's obviously not an ideal listening experience, especially if you're listening on the road, or if you're listening at work and your hand, you can't use your hands, and you can't adjust the volume. And so I think I would love to like readdress some of those topics maybe in the future and that sort of thing. But I don't think there's anything we need to remove from the internet or delete all history of.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have any like damning episodes out there, right? Like there's nothing where it's like, man, we really whiffed on whatever endorsement we put out there or whatever hot take we had. Yet, we're only 31 episodes in. Who knows? Episode 32 is when we start just really going off the rails with hot takes.
Yeah, that's not worth throwing it all away now to show our real colors as absolute psychopaths.
Yeah, no, but I will say this, right? Knowing my personality, so one of the hesitancies I've always had, because I did Pokemon content until let's say 2019 or so.
Sure.
And then I stopped, went to doing a 9 to 5, that kind of thing. And I always wanted to get back into YouTube. I always wanted to get back into content creation. And one of the main reasons I kind of pumped the brakes was knowing my personality. I wanted it to kind of go, well, when I produce something, I want it to be like fully polished and this and that, because you look at big YouTubers, you look at full-time podcasters, they don't have audio issues, or the product they put out is very heavily polished.
Right.
Now, that comes with a team of editors, right? That comes with a team of editors, professional mics, lighting, a director, etc. And I think one of the biggest mental hurdles for me going into this was
Uh-huh.
just put it out and let it be what it is, right? You put out the first episode, and if it's the worst experience out there, well, guess what? You take your lumps and episode 2 gets better, and then
Right.
episode 3 gets better than that. Now, I do think there were a couple things we might have missed on that I think are definite learning experiences. The audio thing is something that is a continual kind of hill to grow on.
Yeah.
I don't think we're at the pinnacle of audio, right? But I
There's
don't
still
think we're
room
at the
for
base of the
improvement.
mountain.
No,
Yeah.
we're putting in work.
Now, if there was one episode that I think you and I both left that episode going, man, we really crushed it, and this is going to be the episode, and then it just bombed.
Lorcana.
Yes, it was the Lorcana episode. So we had this whole episode. All right, we're going to talk about Lorcana.
I feel
Where's
like I
it
did
ranked
like a
towards
full-on
Magic?
research paper on Lorcana and prep
Yes.
for that episode.
So that one, we were both like super invested with it. I had recently come from Gen Con, so I was there when they like officially launched Lorcana into the world. And I don't know, looking back on it, I think it was mostly a timing issue because by the time we got that episode out, it was maybe 3 weeks after it should have been out. Because we could have had that episode like a week or 2 weeks before the street date on Lorcana.
Uh-huh.
But we didn't. I think we learned a lot from that because if you go back through our numbers, so to speak, that episode is still like the worst performing episode we've released.
Yeah,
Like by a long amount.
if you're listening to this and you're ever like curious about Lorcana, I don't think it's a fully, it's a pretty good summary of the game on its release. Obviously, they probably have made changes I haven't kept up entirely to date. But I think it's a solid episode, even if the performance, even if everything screams no, it wasn't. I think at the end of the day, also there's just a discrepancy between people who are into Magic and people who are into Lorcana. It doesn't 100% go. Okay, I'm sorry. People who are into Magic, people who are into Lorcana, and then people who listen to podcasts. It's a weird Venn diagram, but there's not very many in that center shard.
I like that you're using your fingers and hands to actually map out the Venn diagram, even though we just covered that we're on an audio only podcast like 20 minutes ago.
I did that for a visual aid for you. It was
I was like, I don't know who Vin is, but what's his diagram look like? But, with all those lumps, we still learned something from it, right? I think we learned how to better time our episodes as far as like release timing. So now if you ever watch us put out an episode that is like a set review or something like that, we typically try and put them out a week before the set comes out.
Yes, it's a little more relevant.
Yeah, exactly. Because like right now, if I start putting out Thunder Junction reviews and stuff like that, you're going, hey, listen, you missed the boat. Now, it's still going to garner some views because maybe some people want to hear our opinion on it. But you've missed the boat on bringing in like new listeners. You've missed the boat on having the fresh take.
Yeah, it's something that expires like over time. It's just not as it doesn't stand as true as kind of the more conceptual episodes that are a bit more open form. But I do think there is value in looking at the sets just because a lot of people don't get the chance to pour over Scryfall as soon as the spoiler season is over. Like, you might not know about some of the cool cards that are coming out, and so we like to highlight some of the underappreciated stuff. We like to talk about obviously some of the bigger cards and like monetary value of the set, but it kind of needs to be around the release date of the set to carry the hype that Magic or that Wizards and Hasbro have been building up for the set release too. Otherwise, we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Yeah, so I think we've learned a lot as far as like timing, right? Like not just timing and pacing of an episode,
right,
but also timing and pacing of when certain topics work and don't work. And that's something we're going to continue to grow on in the future. and last little bit, because I know we're kind of pushing on like around an hour plus at this point, an hour ish. Um, let's talk goals for a second. So we've covered kind of like what we've learned throughout this past year, stuff like that. Now, just as like a temperature check. So I personally set some goals for the podcast kind of back in New Year's, like New Year's resolution type goals. Some of those I think we're doing well on, but I want to see what kind of goals we have for year 2. So one of my biggest goals was to have the International Women's Day episode. I think it's an important topic. I've heard only really one other podcast do it, and that's one that is Pokemon related that I listen to weekly. But I do think it's an important thing to get out minority voices and to kind of give people a opportunity to get on and have that conversation, because not a conversation that's happening kind of on a daily basis or as often as it should be or as loud as it should be.
Right.
So for me, having that episode was something that was a big kind of check on my New Year's resolutions. And it's something I'd like to see us continue doing, yearly. Like, hey, International Women's Day, even if it's a bonus episode, because this year it happened to fall on a Friday. It doesn't necessarily always fall on a Friday.
Right.
One of the other things that was a big kind of goal for me going into this new year was getting a guest on at least once a month. I think we've been consistently achieving that.
Definitely. I mean, we've had a lot of guests like on, and we had a goal of having like a guest on every episode in a month. Like, we want to increase our guest interactions just because it's always fun to have new people on. It's fun to have people that we've had on before, and it helps us just kind of knit this our part of the web of the Magic community.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it goes back to what we started this conversation with, which is the core tenets of the podcast being that it's for the community, about the community, right? So how do you do that? Well, you bring on members of the community to talk about the community. So having guests come on, and when we have Brian come on, and Brian is well known or a big advocate for kind of giving back and charity events and things like that. So having him have an opportunity to come on and having an hour-long conversation, or however long it ended up being, about those topics that are important to him and why they should also be important to the community, and how we can kind of, as a whole, not just us but everybody out there, whether they're content creators, Magic players, a person that owns LGS or whatever, how we can kind of elevate those topics.
Right.
I think it goes back to what the podcast was all about from its original roots. So that's something I think in year 2 I'd like to see us really emphasize going forward, right? I think we're on a good path. I think that's something that you all could expect from Cole and I, kind of pushing into the second year with more knowledge, hopefully a greater friend pool, not in quality, but in quantity.
Right.
I think quality is already, top shelf, just so we're clear.
Thanks for clarifying that. I think it's important we make sure nobody feels scorned 1 year in.
Yeah, no. Just a 1 year anniversary, burn all the bridges. Time to rebuild for year 2. But no, I do think like that's something that going into year 2 is an exciting kind of frontier for us to keep pushing, right? As far as getting out more and more voices, more and more opinions, and more kind of perspectives on different topics.
Yeah, I think that's very valuable.
What about for you? What would be, I guess, your
so
goals?
My goals are, I would like obviously we've been trying, and like I mentioned earlier, with family stuff and just life, sometimes it's hard to be consistent. But recently, in the last couple of months, I think, and like I'd mentioned earlier, I think as well, in 2024, we've just upped our consistency a lot. We've been posting a lot more regularly, and so for this year, if we did 30 out of 52 weeks in year 1, I'd like to see a significant increase in that, and hopefully get that number up to, at least 50, or something in that realm. And if that means like we're posting a bonus episode every once in a while to to kind of build that buffer. I think that it just means we get more opportunities to create content. And the more content we create, the better we'll get at it. So my goal is for us to just pick up on our consistency and just always, never stop improving. Like we try to listen to the episodes and see where we could have changed things, or like personally, I'm always messing with the audio and trying to get it a little bit better. So I'm moving, and so hopefully we'll have a little bit of a different setup going on soon for the rest of this year.
And I think that's a good point too, because you and I think are going to be our biggest critics on this, and right. We record this now. A typical schedule for us is we record Monday, Tuesday. I spend Wednesday, Thursday kind of editing through audio, making thumbnails, all that kind of stuff. And then, obviously we upload Friday morning. Usually it's up Friday at 5 a.m. on Spotify, like 8 a.m. on YouTube.
Right.
But that means that episode has to be kind of in the can, uploaded by Thursday evening. Sometime late Thursday evening, it's out the window, right? Whatever the episode is, it is now what it is, So that being said, that means what I typically do is not necessarily on Friday. On Friday, I kind of let it marinate on its own. But on Monday, before we record and everything, when I go out and I'm working,
right.
I drive around a little bit for work. That's when I kind of listen to every episode. So I'll listen to the episode. I'll kind of unpack what I think we did really well with it. Maybe my editing wasn't the best, or maybe we rambled a little bit too much, or maybe the audio could have been tweaked here or there, stuff like that. And I think that's how you grow on these things. It can be very cringy, I think, listening to your own voice the first time, but hopefully, you can kind of watch the tape back, so to speak. Like every great sports team, you watch the tape back and figure out where the flaws were, so you can improve upon that.
Yeah, I've recorded video footage of like my Elden Ring gameplay when I was struggling on bosses to try to analyze. Oh, I misstepped here, or like I should have dodge rolled there, that sort of thing. So it always, if it's good to watch your own work and kind of try to observe with a fresh set of eyes. Like you mentioned earlier, when you're recording for a long period of time, or a short period of time, sometimes you get lost in the conversation, and so if sometimes we're rambling, like obviously we're always trying to cut down on the amount of like rambling and tangents that we do as well. Not that tangents aren't good, and I think there are some really great like anecdotes and that sort of thing, but just staying on topic, staying like focused is important to completing the goal of each individual podcast.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Now I think to wrap up this conversation, we talked a little bit about.
Wait 1 second. I have a few more goals. Or one, I can kind of combine it into one, but I'd really like
goals,
to
multiple goals.
I'd like to up our involvement with like our listeners, or if anybody wants to reach out to us. Like obviously we always have an opportunity to send a question of the week or a card of the week or a brew of the week to our email or in the comments of the podcast. But I would love to start getting the chance to do some streaming or stream some games, even if it's spell table or tabletop. Just get the chance to play with our friends and put a different form of content on YouTube.
Yeah, I think that's very admirable. And you and I have talked about this before, right? Which is, at a certain point, we want to develop this into a video podcast, so it's more engaging for YouTube and other audiences. We've also have made not a lot, and I won't necessarily claim that they're the best you're going to find out there, but we have made a couple videos for YouTube, things like that, and I think we'd like to put out more content like that. It's a little different. There's some things that work, and this is another thing we've learned, right? There's certain things that work for YouTube that don't necessarily work for a longer form, hour-long conversation.
Absolutely. Some things are better meant for radio, some things are better meant not for radio, and that same thing goes for long and short YouTube videos.
Yeah. Now, I do, I don't know if you've got any more, but I do have one other final goal, at least for me, kind
Okay.
of pushing into this year, which is I would like to see us have more topics that kind of start pushing into more conversational, but also more creative arenas. And what I mean by that is the episodes I've enjoyed the most and the episodes I look back on the fondest are things like, hey, drafting our best Thunder Junction team, like stuff that's not necessarily A to B to C conversation, but things like the conversation we're having now, right? Where it's very amorphous, it's very free flowing. There's nothing like I can't sit down right now and write a skeleton of how this conversation is going to go because we're feeding off of each other so much that it becomes very free flowing banter.
Right.
And I think the more we do that kind of going forward, the better presenters we're going to be, right? It's going to be more natural to have this conversation. There's going to be less filler words. There's going to be less kind of pauses. You're going to be quicker on your toes to move around. But also, I tend to find them to be more engaging topics as opposed to, and no slight on previous episodes, but as opposed to commanders to get to know us by, or we even did one. Dylan and I did a couple of like, hey, underused monocolor commanders that you should try building. Those are things that I think we've learned. YouTube probably would have really thrived with it, but having that as a 2-hour podcast episode, maybe not so much.
Right. It's a learning experience. So going forward, do not expect any of those videos, listener. If you will have to find your way to our YouTube link to learn about interesting underused two-colored commanders.
Oh, that was done too. We had enemy and ally once. See, listen, Cole, we already got 3, so now we got to do 3-color, 4-color, and a 5-color episode.
Well, expected in the future. So,
yeah. So that would be me and my goals, kind of pushing forward. Also, as another side one, I know I said I only had one more, but I wouldn't mind seeing us go to more events. I really enjoy going to events, whether that's in a creator capacity, whether that's just 2 guys with passes playing games with people and saying hi and seeing what your amazing deck is when you come and stomp us into the ground with it.
right.
I find that those are where I have the most memorable games, where I meet some of the more interesting people. And generally, I have a really positive experience when I go to events and really fond memories when I leave the event.
Well, obviously, if you make a good enough impression on us at an event, you can become a part of our integral Magic playgroup. So keep
Yeah,
your
that's
eyes
what we've
peeled.
learned. So I guess to wrap it up, Cole. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have any other goals you'd like to?
No, I mean, I have other goals, but I think we can move into the wrap up. I think
Okay.
you'll see the goals acted upon in future episodes.
Yeah. So I think to wrap up this kind of conversation, what is? I think this is a good question. So, what is the one core, I guess, takeaway you've had from this past year? If you could summarize it into a little one paragraph.
Yeah, I think it's been really fun getting the chance to set up a regular in time for us to get to shoot the sugar honey iced tea and just chat it up. And so I think this year has been really great for our friendship, Cory. And regardless of the fame and fortune that the ERCast brings us,
It doesn't exist.
valued this chance for us to have kind of this intimate conversation, ideally every week, but sometimes every couple weeks or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think for me it would be about the same, right? Which is, I talked about this a little bit ago, but I really wanted to get back into content creation in some capacity. A Pokemon thing was kind of fun at the time, and I still play Pokemon, but it's sort of lost its luster me a little bit. Like it just wasn't engaging. It became too much work to kind of do a lot of let's play stuff.
Right.
So this past year, what I've really taken away is all the friends that I've made. Not just in the creator community, but also just people we've met. Right? We talked about we've got a consistent commander group now that were, yeah, a couple more creators, sure, admittedly, but their friends, their significant others, stuff like that. I would say they're probably my closest Magic friends at this point. Compared to people I might have known for years.
And it's
So
people we wouldn't have met or might not have met without being involved in the community. Obviously you're on Twitter often enough that you would have maybe recognized Ken through just that means alone. But it's the fact that we kind of talked about like, collaborating in the future that got us conversing a lot more with a lot of our really good friends now. So it's been a great experience for that alone.
yeah. So that was the biggest takeaway for me. It was the last year. I would say a lot of people that I talk to the most. If you take away like coworkers and family that you're going to run into anyways, a lot of the people I converse with the most on a daily basis now are people I've met in the last year through the Magic community. You and I have obviously known each other for years at this point, but I think like you said, our relationship has developed, our friendship has developed a lot more. Just having this time dedicated where, hey, you and I are on a little journey together, or thick and thin at this point.
Right.
And I think it's something that even if you and I never become the A-list, whatever 100 million subscriber Magic podcast or whatever the lofty goal is, I think I can take away this experience and go, hey, it was a valid usage of my time and I'm better off for it. And I think that's all we can ask for, right?
I that's very well said. It feels good to be a part of the ErCast Wolf Pack.
You say wolf pack, but if we got like 3 more people, we could turn this into the Tiamat cast and each one of us could be a head.
Okay.
But I think that's a good spot to kind of put a pin in this conversation. And to you guys at home, hopefully you have learned a lot about maybe our mindset. If nothing else, I'm not saying you listen to this and you're going to run off and make your own podcast, but hopefully you've learned a lot about our mindsets, kind of where we are temperature wise with our current standing from this past year and what we want to do in this upcoming year. And obviously thank all of you guys because we can produce it, right? Like Cole and I could sit here and talk into empty mics for an hour a week, but it's you guys that are listening, and it's you guys that are giving us questions of the week, and it's you guys that are guest hosting on this thing, and it's you guys that are coming into pods and playing games with us and all that kind of thing. So, speaking for both of us, I think thank you. Is the easiest and simplest way to say it is thank you very much. Hopefully we do you proud going forward. But just thank you for kind of being on the roller coaster with us.
I absolutely agree. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's like Cory said, it's a lot more fun doing this and uploading it to the internet than it is talking these conversations out without the camera on. So thank you guys so much for like listening and just being involved with us and sending the questions and giving us a reason to keep uploading. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah. So Cole, I think we're heading to question of the week, card of the week.
Let's
and we're going to put
Cory.
a pin on this episode. Question of the week, and this is the first question of the week we've gotten from Apple Podcasts. So now that we're on Apple Podcasts for the 3rd week now, we finally got a question of the week from there. So
Hooray.
That's awesome. This one comes from Plutarch the True out on Apple Podcasts. Cole, the Lost Caverns of Ixalan gave us one of my I'll say there. It's not really, I guess. Gave us one of my favorite commanders recently in Waita.
Oh, cool.
To take advantage of the enrage keyword. I was wondering, what is a keyword you think could see a dedicated commander for the first time in one of the newer upcoming sets?
Oh, well, Plutarch, thank you so much for reaching out to us. And thanks for popping on to Podcasts. I'm glad we're getting some engagement here. But Plutarch, my answer to you would be I've always been a fan of like neg one counters. There are a couple of commanders that care about them, but I think there's nobody who does it in Jund that brings together kind of the
Hmm.
green and black and the black and red Scorpion God and Hepatra, like kind of centralizing neg one counters, because that's always been a kind of a weaker archetype. And not that it's not that it needs to be stronger, like maybe it's weak for that reason, but it's always been a dream to be able to put like the Scorpion God and Hepatra in a deck together and kind of get the synergy of all three of those colors and see how it feels as an archetype.
Well, it's definitely fallen behind, I think, compared to +1/+1 counters, because those see synergy left and right, and there's a million +1/+1 counter decks and commanders.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That might be an understatement. There, a
So I
million.
definitely I
Yeah.
definitely agree with that, especially because I think out of the three, like the Scorpion God, the Locust God, and
Scarab God, don't
Scarab God,
spit
yeah.
it out,
I
man.
was like, wait, did I say Scorpion the first one, or did I say Scarab the first one? But either way, I mean, Scarab God is definitely like, I would say 1A, 1B with Scarab God, Locust God, and then like not even number 2 or 3, but like number 8. It's like there's a huge gulf of nothing, and then they go, oh, and the Scorpion God.
Yeah.
Like he just doesn't receive the same love.
He's the abandoned child. People are afraid of scorpions because they have a lot of like stinging and pinching bits.
Now, I think the thing you got to watch out for though is if you do the neg one counters. I think it's a good idea. You said in Jund, right? So you get black, red, green.
Right.
Is because there's already one in blue, black.
Don't even
That
mention
is.
his name. We don't need to soil this episode with that slimy slug. Those
Yeah,
aren't
but
those
that's what I'm
aren't
saying.
neg ones. They're not. They're sludge counters, and then creatures get neg ones effect.
I do
Based
like
on
some of the neg one commanders though, like Massacre Girl and the new one as well.
right wither.
I also, yeah, the known killer and all that.
Right.
I'm also a big fan of Silumgar, which kind of does a similar effect, but it's with dragons. So you turn a bunch of dragons sideways and you neg somebody's board equal to the amount of dragons attacking them.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so maybe you see more neg one counter commanders.
What about you? What's would you like to see?
Um, so instead of going for like what I would like to see, don't get me wrong, I would be okay with any of these, but I kind of honed in on the what do I think I would see in a new set or like an upcoming set.
Okay.
So if we take out Modern Horizons 3, right, because that's going to be sort of a free for all as far as abilities and stuff. If we look at like Bloomburrow and Duskmourn, which would be the next two like core sets coming out,
Right.
Bloomburrow I can't really put a finger on. Like maybe there's going to be some. I don't even know. Like I feel like there's gonna be +1/+1 counters with the rabbits because they're Selesnya. But I have no idea on those. Maybe the raccoons give me better stuff to do with junk tokens.
Yeah, maybe. I'm loving junk tokens so far, so I don't know. Raccoons do
Now,
dig in the junk.
yeah, so maybe there's that. Now the one that jumped out to me was Duskmourn
Uh-huh.
because it's supposed to be a modern horror set. So I thought about stuff that would be underused. Like right now, you just don't see dedicated commanders for. Hear me out. Old mechanic, Haunt.
Okay.
So Haunt is usually
It's
when
like an
this
aura.
creature or whatever. Yeah, it's like when it enters the battlefield, No. The Aura one's a different one, which I'll talk about in a second because I had that one queued up too. So Haunt is usually a creature that enters the battlefield and it does some effect, and then when it dies, it quote unquote haunts another creature.
Uh-huh.
And then when that creature that it is haunting dies, you get the same effect again. So just as an example, like, oh, if this one comes on the battlefield, it draws you a card. So it'll be ETB, draw a card. When it dies, it haunts this other creature, and when that creature dies, you draw a card again. Something,
Okay.
some loop like that. I could see Haunt maybe getting some kind of love. I don't know what it would be because all of the cards are very disjointed right now. So it would have to come out with a lot of new cards to support it. Or the other one, and this is what you were thinking of, Disturb.
Okay.
So Disturb is the creature does whatever, it dies, and then you can cast it from the graveyard for its Disturb cost. Or usually it comes back as an aura that you can enchant onto a creature. But when the disturbed version dies, it goes into exile instead.
Okay.
So maybe some commander that like either gives you benefits when you cast something from disturb cost, or if a disturbed creature were to go into exile, maybe you can attach it to the commander and then like disperse it out on your upkeep, sort of like that cursed commander Lind or whatever it is.
Okay, yeah.
I could see something like that. That might be interesting. So it's taking kind of a play on the haunting disturbed role.
I can dig it.
Now, I don't know what that would look like long run. Like maybe it would be an Esper commander or something like that. Because most of the disturbed stuff is like Azorius.
Yeah, so you
But,
just want to add one color to it.
Yeah, and I think you would have to come out with a lot of support for it, right? Because there's just not enough juice in the archetype right now to really make it viable. But if, in Dustmorn they come out with like 20 or 30 disturb cards, maybe suddenly it becomes a deck you can run. That was my thought on it.
Right on.
So Pluzark, hopefully that answers your question. Now I will say that we do have a friend, Ken EDH, as a matter of fact, who does have a very potent Waita deck. So it is not far from our circle of commanders. But hopefully that kind of answers your question. And if you have a question of the week that you'd like to submit, you can hit us up on all those socials. You can also send us an email or plug it at the bottom of Spotify or Apple Podcasts, apparently, because there's a comment section there. And we will try and answer as many of them as we can, really. Maybe one day we'll just do a question of the week episode where we answer like 20 of them. We'll kind of see how it goes.
Lightning round, yeah.
But that is question of the week. Cole, what is our card of the week?
So the card of the week this week, Cory, is going to be Obsidian Fireheart. This is a really neat little card I've been playing around with, trying to put in Rurikthar. It's 3 red and 1 colorless for a elemental, where you can pay 1 and 2 red to put a blaze counter on target land without a blaze counter on it. As long as that land has a blaze counter on it, it has. At the beginning of your upkeep, this land deals 1 damage to you. And he's a 4/4. And that effect sticks around regardless of if Obsidian Fireheart dies or is removed. So I just like this guy as a potential mana sink. If you don't have anything better to do and you got 6, you got a ton of mana maybe, it's a great, you can actually just win the game with this outright if you have enough mana. Or use it for interesting Waita stuff. I guess that's who cares about dealing damage to creatures. But you can deal damage yourself if you need to. I think it's a great card. It's got a crazy mana cost with that 3 red, so it's a little hard to splash unless you have a lot of red mana. But I think it's got some potential.
What's funny is I actually felt like I was the only person who'd ever heard of that card because I keep a notes document on my phone of like weird cards I run across, and it's on there solely because I was like, oh, if I ever want to build like a Zozu the Punisher or what's the other one? The Yurlock, the Scorched Thrash, the one that is like a mana burn commander. It just seemed like it would be a thematic fit that would work so well.
Oh, absolutely. Pestering people about lands.
It should be. I think it is something to bring up too. By the way, if you're listening, so question of the week and card of the week. So when we do question of the week, Cole has no future knowledge of what the question of the week is, so he has to think on his feet. And I have no future knowledge of what card of the week is, so I also have to think on my feet a little bit. So the fact that he brought up Obsidian Fireheart and it was some obscure card, and I was like, oh yeah, I do know that card. It tells you something, because I did not have a prepared speech at all. Just like didn't have anything prepared for what an odd word he'd like to see get pumped would be.
So, I hope you guys appreciate the improv elements of of our show.
But hey, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Once again, thank you guys for helping us make it through an amazing first year of the podcast. Thank you for sticking around to the end of the episode. If you want to reach out to Cole directly, you can find him at loveandmana.mtg. He is out on Twitter a little bit, right. Reds, I guess, Instagram, Facebook, your mom's house. Your dad's, his own house. Yeah, or if you hear a lone wolf howling on a silent night, it's probably Cole. You should tell him to go back home. His fiance misses him, and she'd like him to go home. He's been out too long, going out for a gallon of milk. You can find me at Sleevecard on all of those platforms, or you can reach out to the podcast directly at UrCastPod or contact.urcast@gmail.com. Also, to call out somebody at the very end of today's episode, if your name is Tyler and you would like to submit a question of the week, you can do so by reaching out to either of those socials or Gmail or the comment section at the bottom of these things. So if your name is Tyler, feel free to do so. And if your name's not Tyler, you can also feel free to do so. But thank you for making it to the end of today's episode. Have yourselves a magical Friday, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.